Okay, so setting up the thing for live streaming.
Open Security Summit, OSS, is a non-profit that
Right, so cool. So we're now streaming. So if this is working fine, we should be streaming to both YouTube and LinkedIn, right? Which would be quite cool, right? So what we're going to talk about this is, Louis has been doing a number of Open Security Summit sessions around threat modeling. It's actually a good example of the amazing amount of content that we have in the, oh, actually, my camera's off. We have a great amount of content that that we have in the Open Security Summit that it kind of gets lost in the sort of background noise, right? And I feel that now that we got the Gen AI, which we're going to talk in a second, we have a great opportunity to really start to put a lot of these pieces together, right? And then go together. So Louis, so the first topic I wanted to cover, right, is I think with the ability of Gen AI to understand content, forget about creating content, just understanding content. And the fact that you now have multiple models, from open source models to commercial models, and you have this sort of aggregation of models where we can now use 2 or 3 or 4, glue them together, right, in chain environments, right? Are we in a position where we can really make threat modeling scale and actually work?
I mean, the one thing that I'm gonna try to show right now is how to get into a domain you have no idea about.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you can do a literature research, and I have jumped into doing automotive and industrial control systems threat modeling, but I had to read a lot before I was able to be productive. It took me quite a while to ramp up. And what I'm trying to do in this session right now is cut the learning curve a little bit and help me get a chance to land with my to land running, right? To land and immediately start being able to identify things I know and get simple explanations for things I might not know or concepts I don't understand, and then use that to keep on the threat modeling and all that. So I think on that sense, I think it's a great chance to improve compared to just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and I think you're touching on what I feel is a really amazing element of the LLMs, right? Which is this ability that it has to create customized learning experiences, right? And it was quite interesting that one of the things I found, especially as my role intersected a lot with security and technology and security and technology, I realized that the way that we learn in security is actually very different. But I also found that it's one of the best ways to learn, because when we need to learn, like, for example, the domain you talked about, we don't tend to ask, how does it work? Or what does it do? We tend to ask, how does it work? Like, what's actually going under the hood? So we go deeper, I think, than a lot of other practitioner teams, because we almost have this desire, and we need to really understand how it works, and we need to connect it to the kind of the references that we have. And then once we do that, we find a huge amount of problems, and we can do proper threat modeling, right? So I actually think that the way we are wired to learn in cybersecurity is a very good way. The interesting challenge is, how can we now create an environment with the LLMs that allows us to, like you said, to go into a domain or a language, right, or a framework, right, that we don't have experience, and very quickly onboard it and very quickly add value, for example, in a threat modeling, to creating threat models for those environments.
But definitely. I've been thinking a lot about this. I work for a company now that does shipping with vessels with huge ships around the world, right? And we're currently looking for a position. I'm not making any publicity. I'm not naming the company, but we're looking for a position that helps us look into cybersecurity of the vessels and towards the IT environment that is connected with the vessels. And one thing that I realized is, of course, we will not find someone out there that has this experience. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
And I expect cybersecurity practitioners to be able to pivot and basically do this job that you were describing, right? So how do I approach novel knowledge, novel things, new things to me in a way that makes sense to me, but that which is kind of repetitive? So how do I go about attacking or putting the goggles of the attacker and identifying the weak points of any system, regardless of its nature? And I think that's exactly what I'm going to try to do. So I don't know anything about maritime cybersecurity. I come from IT, but the only thing I know is there's a bunch of SCADA systems, ICS, sensors, actuators, and things on board, which kind of feels familiar because I did analysis of factories, right? So it kind of has a touch to it, but of course, there's a lot more to it that I have satellite communications and radio and things that I have absolutely no idea.
And I think that the idea there for the LLMs is that if you can start to feed these principles and you feed the workflows and you feed the data and you feed examples of what good looks like even in other industries, and then the new data points, in a way, the LLMs can start to glue them together, right? They can start to use, in a way, the same language, the same pattern that we're looking for in that industry. And what I like about this is also the fact that once we do have findings, we can use the LLMs to translate this into that industry own, words, into that industry own sort of, frames of reference to say, look, there's this thing here, but instead of describing the cybersecurity, element of it, which of course are very loaded terms, right? You then describe it in that industry, what's it called, language in that industry context, so that somebody from that industry can actually understand what we're talking about. Because that's the other thing that we sometimes don't cover, which is the fact that in cybersecurity, we have our own particular language. Like even threat modeling has its own culture, has its own language, has its own references, right? That somebody who's never done threat model before has no idea why there's that.
And that's why it's important to translate the output of the exercise into something that the consumer of the exercise will be able to consume, right? It helps no one to create something incredibly technical which cannot be consumed. So my effort always is to create. I like Gherkin as the language or the structure, not the language. English is a language, but Gherkin as the structure for outputting the results or the threats, because it's very clear. Given this vulnerability and these other things, when bad action happens, then outcome, and then it's very clear how one thing connects to the other. And I'm actually very, very strict on separating threats from vulnerabilities. I know many people are not very strict, but I think it just confuses everyone else and makes a very messy thing. And many LLMs, when you ask for vulnerabilities, they will say injection or cross-site scripting, but those are attack techniques. They're not vulnerabilities, right? So even then, if you feed the LLM with garbage, you get garbage out, because it's then not clear how cross-site scripting happens, which is an attack technique.
So Gherkin is a really interesting example, because you could say that Gherkin crosses domains, right? So in a way, Gherkin is a way to describe that in a language that can be understood by other domains, other experts, other business elements, technical elements, etc. Because, like I said, Gherkin is about if this, then that, right? When this happened, given this, given that, then this happens. And then the coolest thing about that is you can actually describe even the outcomes. In fact, you can have the same thing created 5 or 10 different Gherkins, right? Outputs just based on the audience. And it's quite funny, because I remember when the first time I saw Gherkin and Cucumber and all that stuff, I was quite excited, because I thought this is really cool. It's a great way to describe tests. And then I realized that at the time it was all done like by glue code, where they literally were doing string replacements. I'm like, come on. But of course, that was the only thing that we had at the time, right? But I think now we actually can do these interesting Gherkin translations, right? Where you can start with what you want, and then you have these, in a way, quite nice, objective ways of describing things, right?
Exactly. So I'm pasting on the chat for everyone, and I will show this for everyone seeing the recording online. Link to the GitHub where I keep the exercises, the output of the exercises that we have done.
I think we can move into your more
in the
schedule
structure.
planning, right? I think we got a nice
That's right. That's right.
a nice sort of introduction of nuggets, and then what we're going to try to do is create some segments of videos of this, right? But I think we had some good conversation. So now if you want to share your screen and then take it to the threat modeling 5, which is the 5th edition, right? Of this.
I know. So I have asked a colleague of mine, Robert Graham, to participate. So I will unmute him in just a second.
Yeah.
After I have shared my screen. So
Robert,
basically,
you are co-host now, so you should be able to present, and I'll give you the spotlight, and I'll remove my spotlight.
Just give me 1 second to be able to present.
Hey, Robert.
Now I am present.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Yeah, good. Good to have you here.
Hey Rob, glad you could make it. Thank you very much for coming. So
I'm honored.
Basically, Robert will be helping me, will be asking uncomfortable questions, right? So the idea of this threat model is to look at a modern day ship, modern day vessel, cargo ship, or whatever kind of ship you want, and be able to threat model this. So I thought I had changed the thing. Of course, it's not 3, it's 5. I just reused the first two or three slides. So let me go through the slides very quick so that everyone knows what we're doing, and then we can share screen. So share screen first, share screen 2. There you go, share. All right. So me, I'm passionate about application security. I've been doing threat modeling before there was a book on threat modeling since the early 2010s, or maybe a bit earlier. I've done a bit of everything on different type of systems. The only thing missing on my list is a ship. It's a maritime system, and that's one itch I wanted to scratch today. So let's see how that goes. Again, threat modeling, in case you don't know what that is based on the definition from Brooke Schoenfeld, a technique to identify attacks a system must resist and defenses that will bring the system to a desired defensive state. So I like this definition a lot. And what we're doing here is a kata. So if you know karate or any martial art, a kata is the Japanese word for form, and it just means it's a choreographed pattern of movements. The idea is you do not know how to hit, how to defend, unless you do the movement many times. And taking this into the domain of threat modeling means we practice threat modeling on a safe environment where the stakes are low, so that we can learn how to threat model better and make mistakes and learn from them without having any repercussions. Threat modeling, as understood on the wide scheme of things, is usually thought of as a 4-step process where we have modeling, understand what we're building or what we're analyzing, scope it, validate that, analyze threats, so identify, document vulnerabilities and threat scenarios, and finally, what are we going to do about this? How can we mitigate this, accept, avoid, reduce, or transfer risks? So with that said, I have pasted on the chat window these resources. So the first one is a GitHub repo, which I use for sharing the outcome of these sessions. So basically, I have here a setup that would allow you to follow the exercises together with me. I am using GraphViz for diagramming. Why? Because I can keep it as code. That's why I'm using it. So I like to keep my diagrams as code, and I produce out of this code the images, and I use a plugin in VS Code, and there's a couple of scripts I use for helping me create it. One thing that I made just for this session was I created a ChatGPT agent. This is the link, which is an expert on maritime cybersecurity, meaning I did a bit of research. Which is, I went to scholar.google.com. I typed in maritime cybersecurity. I downloaded a bunch of documents, which you can see on screen, and just fed it as context to this chatbot. And I told it, you're an expert on maritime cybersecurity, you know ISO 27001 and ISO 62443 by heart, because those are the norms that we need to understand. And everything that follows is basically seeing how well this thing can help us process this. Why are we looking at ships or vessels? I think it was 2 months ago, a bridge in the city of Baltimore in the United States collapsed after the cargo ship Dali hit a support pier. I'm not sure if everyone knows what that is. So let me see if the video will go.
And I imagine if that thing was done maliciously, right?
I mean, there's speculation that it could have been malicious. So let's try to analyze it and figure out whether it could be malicious, right? So that's part of the motivation for it, because the consequences of taking over these things could be horrendous for infrastructure worldwide. These cargo ships can carry 7.5, 8,000 containers. If you think a container is one truck on the road, it's 8,000 trucks. So just imagine 8,000 trucks, one after the other on any road. That's the mass we're speaking about. So let me put the video. I hope Zoom does a good work of sending the video. So we see the ship.
Yeah, we can see it.
The ship is moving. Then it goes dark. And you can see that it's not stopping, right? You have inertia, you have currents. And then you see that it's starting to turn very fast. You see dark smoke going up. And the ship keeps on turning, keeps on turning, keeps on turning. Oh, I can imagine the desperation of the crew inside. We're going to hit it. We're going to hit it. Oh. And then we don't see any cars anymore. Cars stopped crossing the bridge. Last one. The police got a call. Mayday, mayday, we lost control. Close the bridge. We're going to hit it. Boom. They hit it. They hit the pier, which is the name of the column in the terms of infrastructure of bridges. And then you see some sparks coming up because it hit some high tension cable or something. So the question that some people ask themselves is, could this have been a cybersecurity incident? And well, it could potentially have been, but let's look at the facts, right? So we have the fact is that this ship lost propulsion and dropped the anchor. So maybe that's why it turned so fast. And it was what is called a total loss of engine and electrical power. So the engine stopped turning around. And these things are massive. I mean, the engine room of one of these ships is as big as a series of houses put together. So its dimension is hard to understand if you have never been inside one. Apparently, this ship had already had a propulsion issue in Chile and was under probation to not lose its license. And as it happens, local pilots of the Bay Area were helping steer the ship in the port. Why? In many ports, in many canals, Panama Canal, Suez Canal, and many others, local people board the ships and steer or help steer the ship through waters that are not necessarily well known to people from abroad. Basically, they know the waters like the back of their hands and can steer ships very well. And we know that the crew issued a mayday, which helped the police close the road and basically avoided lives being lost. It also helped that it was 1 a.m. and there was no traffic jam on the bridge. So Occam's razor tells us probably this was not a cybersecurity incident. The ship had already a record. But now let's put our bad people goggles on. What could it take to take over a ship? What kind of systems do we have on board the ship to be able to take it over? And what we have is basically our ship, which communicates, depending on where it is located, with different things near the shore. It can be using cellular phone networks. It could be using VHF radio. It could be using satellite communication for far communication. It can be talking on the port with the operator, with ship services, with private companies. It can be talking or not talking, but there's people coming in and out. So one thing that we realize is there is a pilot which is foreign to the ship. So without knowing anything about ships, about how they're built, about their networks, we have someone from outside coming inside with potentially USB sticks or something for plugging them in and looking at maps, looking at weather data, looking at something. So the first question is, what could go wrong? So Robert, are you with me? What do you think could go wrong? I mean, you're letting someone in from outside who has no relationship to the ship, and this person will plug the same USB stick in every single ship this person boards. What do you think could go wrong?
Well, first of all, how are we doing a mission control to validate that a pilot is who he says he is? Right? That would be if a guy shows up, theoretically, it looks like I can't post to the chat, but theoretically you need a blue uniform, a blue tie, a light shirt, and a credential hanging around your neck. Very risky from an attacker perspective, so probably a lower, that's going to be a lower probability, but still, is it possible to board the ship as a pilot when you impersonate one? Maybe
That's great.
maybe
So
your
if we think
whole
of
idea
that,
is just to bring your own USB stick, plug it in, and then be like, oh, I forgot something in the office. I'm gonna go before we leave, continue on. I'm gonna run back to my office, and then you just leave. That could be a credible attack vector right there.
all right. So we have insufficient. What would be the vulnerability for the first one you described? So what is the vulnerability? What is the problem here and that we're abusing, right?
I mean, I would describe it as insufficient authentication of a third-party pilot, where I don't know if you want to denote that that's physical presence as opposed to remoting in.
It's worth just making the comment that the reason why some of these threads sometimes are interesting is because when you then look for evidence of why is that not possible, sometimes you find other very interesting blind spots. Because that could be a case where they go, oh, we do that because we everybody has this card, and you go, okay, cool. So how do you get that card, right? And then sometimes it's worth following the rabbit holes, or in a way having chain thread models where you already know the vulnerabilities on certain systems, and you're going, oh, hold on, you depend on the other system, right? But that has these problems.
I mean, one thing that kind of gives them away is that they arrive by a boat and board from the side, and the boat has something, and they might have some documents to sign, right? At least that's how I remember it happening once in a cruise ship I boarded, right? So I remember that happening. But yeah, of course, I mean, establishing trust is very, very difficult.
I was just going to say, now you're talking about transitive trust, right? So am I simply accepting that the local port authorities are vetting this? If so, then that's transitive trust. Or am I vetting it, am I validating the credentials myself? Do I know in advance that it will be, Jack Moo boarding versus, Alan Smith?
Okay, so we would need to validate credentials with the port authorities as a possible solution, right?
That would be a possible mitigation. Absolutely.
All right. So that was one thing. Now, the other thing regarded the media, right? So what is the problem with the media?
Well, where are we getting? Where are these USB sticks coming from? Are they
From his back
fully?
pocket.
Well, yeah, yeah. How did he get in his back pocket? Did he buy it off of Amazon? I don't know. Are these issued by the Port Authority? Are they simply, picked up? Like I said, literally off of Amazon. I can use whatever USB stick I want. I just pull whatever files I need off of my work computer. Put it on my favorite USB stick that's attached to my keychain or my lanyard, and then off I go. Or is there some sort of technical validation on that side?
All right. So we would say, given crew and externals might bring media with them when they plug it in, then it can compromise onboard systems, right? So we don't know anything about onboard systems, but we know out of experience, ample experience, that USB sticks are dangerous, right? And not only that, I mean, you have a crew, right? And the crew has 3 months on board the ship. So they bring as much media as they can, and they just plug it in and watch it and whatever. So we might need more than one measure, right? So how would you tackle this media thing?
That's actually, I think, a little bit tougher than is necessarily obvious. I mean, even if you said, okay, we've done enough due diligence to say, well, these USB sticks are issued by the Port Authority and stuff like that, you still have supply chain attack vectors where if there's a central IT sourcing group, could you potentially compromise the sticks, all the USB sticks in their supply. So even if they're not necessarily sourcing them off of Amazon, in some ways that may actually have some benefits.
And they might have been sane, right?
Sorry, say that again.
The USB sticks might have been healthy at some point.
Sure. They could have been sterilized, and formatted or whatever.
But they're putting the same USB stick everywhere.
But that's
so the next
herpes,
thing, right?
That's
it will
the next
catch
thing
herpes at some point.
is this this not necessarily safer USB stick usage. So there's a whole bunch of options in that supply chain. I mean, ideally, if you start talking about countermeasures, you probably want to go and sanitize it and
but may you
possibly
sanitize this? I
Sorry?
mean, here I would really go the way of content discernment and first of all, using use a data sluice, which is meant basically like water sluices for going from one level of water to the other. This is a data thing. So you put it in a machine that's isolated from all other networks. It does some checking of the thing, of the files in the thing, and then the data might be moved from this trusted bastion to some other place, never by the USB stick, because you will have service personnel for the SCADA systems, you will have pilots, you will have the crew, you will have a lot of people, right? So use the data sluice, and this is basically hardened system, content discernment and reconstruction of files, and maybe something else, hardened system, CDR, and I could say even isolation.
Yeah, typically usually using some sort of virtualization technology. Yeah, exactly.
Some isolation, so both on the network and compute environment.
Yes.
So
now, our mission here is really to focus on the safety of the vessel, on the protection of the vessel itself. But if you look at the at the Port Authority, they have their own security concerns because conceivably, if these controls are not in place, they could, begin a whole new infection vector through a ship that has picked something up while in Chile. So, sort of a sidebar there, but the Port Authority would want to do their own, would require their own security controls and countermeasures as well.
Actually, here's a question. Are we now looking at situations just like now the bigger companies, other companies with really good security teams are pushing security downstream to their supply chain? Could it be a situation where the ports become that player, right? And they become the one that basically push security downstream to the boat, right? To whoever touched their environment, they start to push all these security requirements, right? To make sure they don't have this kind of vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to start, right? So I've in the exercise that I have prepared, I'm trying to understand, okay, how does it work, right? So this was an easy pick, understanding, okay, we have people coming in, but then let's look at a bit at the system, right? So before we run out of time, and then we didn't do any vessel security. This is based on this DNV resource, how a modern vessel looks like, right? So it has a bunch of green communication networks, which I interpret as being IT, and blue communication networks being OT. Now, even the green could be OT. I'm not exactly sure what the color means, but we have power management, we have propulsion, steering, engine, water ingress detection system. You don't want to sink, ship safety, decoders, cargo management. You don't want the ship to tilt, so you have to have something helping you manage the cargo. Bow thrusters to help it turn or go back in any case. Then you have satellite communication and all that. So we can say it's more of a floating data center. So in an effort to go forward and say, okay, hey, let's understand what we're dealing with, right? So I created, oh God, I was trying to copy. It didn't copy, so give me 1 second to copy from the presentation itself. So I created a series of prompts, and let's just see how my maritime cybersecurity bot deals with them, right? So let me ask the questions here. So the first one is, I want to understand common systems and whether they belong to IT or OT. So I would say, I ask, what are the most common systems in a modern ship and what's their function? And then tell me, are they IT or OT? So this helps me understand my target of evaluation. It helps me zoom in and scope and focus on some part. I mean, I could not dare try to analyze something as complex as a ship at once,
here,
right?
You could do like copy and paste of a screenshot into here, isn't it?
Pardon?
You can copy and paste like a screenshot, right?
Oh, I could do that. I just have the text already prepared for this. Now I'm not sure if my internet connection is not working or whether ChatGPT broke.
Yeah.
Which is always that's the.
Well, your internet is good because you're speaking and it's coming out quite nicely, right? So.
I mean, yeah. I have run these tests and I honed the questions, but I wanted to do it live to show how it works, right?
Sometimes I found that you record a video.
I know.
Also, you can go back and forth.
You need the cooking show variant where you're like, oh, look, here's the table. It already popped out.
Exactly. Oops,
all right, something went wrong, so it didn't like.
Oh, just go regenerate. No, click on that regenerate. Yeah, there. Yeah, sometimes it. Yeah.
Okay,
give it a second chance.
Well, I don't even have the
Actually, they've been better for a while recently. They, somehow maybe some developer did like 6 months ago shows there's a suspicious activity from your computer. It felt like, dude, come on, that's a bit harsh, right? Like making me feel guilty, right? And now they showed that error message, right?
Yeah, but I mean, now it's working. Now it's giving us a lot of
that's really cool.
So I mean, it helps us to understand what we're dealing with. And we can
Yeah.
see that there's a lot more OT, operational technologies, SCADA systems, than than
Yeah.
IT systems, right? So the amount of systems that we see here are just out of any proportion, right? So we have satellite, we have propulsion systems, we have video surveillance, IT networks. And we could say, okay, let's copy this output. So I want to copy this thing. I could put it as part of the definition here. Let's see if I can target of evaluation, if I can add it here.
Man, I'm so glad you're doing this. I wouldn't even thought of this. And there's so many exciting, like, threat vectors
Yeah, so what
and
you want to
stuff.
do is you want to ask it to give you markdown table. Yeah, there you go. Fair enough.
I know. I forgot the markdown instruction. Now it works. So now I
It's actually
might
annoying
have to
because
wait a
I
second.
actually think they do markdown on the way down. I think they actually send the markdown. So in a way, the markdown already exists in your browser, right?
I know. I mean,
But it's very powerful to do that, I
I've
guess.
been doing this for a while now, almost air communication, safety, security. All right, now, I mean, it makes sense to do this. So now we have our nice table here. So now we have our systems, functions, classification. But I would like to understand, okay, there must be standards for network segregation, right? So the one thing, if you don't know anything about IT and OT, is that IT and OT never touch each other. You do not send messages from IT to OT or from OT to IT without something in between, which is very well guarded and will not allow any stray communication. Right? So you don't want anything talking to anything that's not necessarily what you expect. So let's see. Next question. So what is the recommendation for network segregation? How many networks should there be? Give me the output as a markdown table. Oh God, I lost it. What am I doing? Oh God, what? I had already
It's
started.
reloading in real time.
Provide the output as a markdown table. So I hope losing the context doesn't cause trouble for later. I might need to recreate the previous answer. Let's see.
It's interesting while it's generating that, it's interesting as you showed your table earlier, that depending upon, sort of your, goals, attack goals, the different systems become a lot more interesting to different types of threat groups. So for instance, the engine would be a lot of, very interesting to, certain groups trying to prevent you from getting where you're going. But the security, what was it called? It was the security, essentially the security camera systems would be possibly of great interest to pirates. Whereas the navigational would be interesting if you're trying
cases.
Yeah. There's some really interesting cases here.
There was this case of shipping company. I think it was MSC. Two of their vessels were targeted by drug cartels. So when they were leaving South America, some ships docked to the big one. They used the cranes on board to take several tons of merchandise, and they stored it in reefer containers, the ones that are AC, that have temperature control, and they stored it in the empty room in front of it so that they could pass through port
customs
checks.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometime later they downloaded it, or they took it apart. So now I would like to know, okay, so I will combine the first answer and basically ask it to classify in which of the given networks this system could go, right? That helps me understand. So what are in a modern, provide the output as a markdown table, add a column to, and Add a column.
Louis, just a quick one. I'm going to make you a host because I need to go into the other session. So feel free to keep going as much as you want, right? So
All right.
no time
Perfect.
limit. So I'll make you a host and then you can just stop the recording and the live streaming when you're finished.
Just by clicking on terminate. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Cool.
So add a column to reference the network you provided in the previous answer. So ideally, this could be the same one we already have here. So ideally, we would get the same AIS, ECDIS, GNS, GPS, radar, GMDSS, and all the other things. And if not, we might have no, we don't have necessarily the same systems. All right, so we can provide it with this definition we have here. So that's a problem of having lost the context. But I mean, it shows you the limits of what we can achieve, right? All right, let's see how it works with that. It should take the input that it gave us first, which was more complete, and it would then enhance it with the classification of the network. And then I will ask it to generate a diagram, which is a lot more interesting.
Mm-hmm. While we're waiting for that, I noticed that I didn't realize this, but apparently the electronic chart display and information system is separate from the navigation itself. So that presents an interesting situation where you could possibly compromise the navigation, steer the boat in one direction, and inform the crew that they're going another. Not even so they would have a harder time realizing that they were even off course.
I mean, this is basically what Stuxnet was doing for the centrifuge.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly. You're right. I didn't even think of that. You're absolutely right. It would essentially be the Stuxnet variant of, or there you go. If you were able to even just get to the charting system so that they think they're off course, that's more the Stuxnet bit. Make them think they're off course and have them steer in the wrong direction. That's what Stuxnet did, right? It made it seem like the centrifuges were spinning at the wrong speed, so they turned them up. So essentially, because that was the easiest way to attack the system.
All right, so I like that one. So insecure, unauthenticated, or I mean, I don't like using insecure because it could mean so many things.
Yeah,
so I would like to perhaps consider it more unauthenticated and unsigned communication between what was the systems you were mentioning? What were the systems?
So the one was the navigational system, and the other one is the chart. So the potentially, and I'm
ECIDS, right?
Yes.
ECIDS and
between ECIDS, which is essentially the output, the presentation layer, and the essentially the underlying information, which is the navigational system. And then you have a couple options there. It looks like there's a navigation system that uses a couple different signals, and then there's like just the GPS. So you have a couple different entry points.
All right. So would that be GPS, or which one would it be?
A GPS would be one. I think GNSS would be another one. Possibly
GNSS.
even the possibly even radar.
All right.
But probably the GPS is probably the most valuable.
And GPS signal and GPS system. I will keep it to GPS.
Sure, that's good enough for now.
So given the communication inside the PCI DIS network can be tampered with because we have unauthenticated and unsigned communication. When a bad actor is in that network, then the PCI DIS will show incorrect information, and the crew will steer badly or something like that, right?
Well, there's two parts, right? So there's two variants, and it would probably depend upon a couple things, not the least of which is which system is better protected. So if it were easier to attack the ECDIS system, you may want to tamper with the output so that you present something different, which is, I think, what you have here. You're presenting that you're off course, even though you're not. Then there's the opposite, that if the GPS system were easier to attack, you might be in a position where you say, I'm going to alter the GPS signal, but
yeah, but then
share
you have
something
different.
different.
You have different vulnerabilities, right? So one
That's
is the
different
communication
vulnerabilities,
between
absolutely.
GPS system and ECIDS, and the other one is the GPS system being able to be jammed or thrown off course because of a stronger signal, which could be a very bad case if you're close to, for example, Iran, right? So they could
Yes,
steer the
exactly.
ship closer to their coast and then take it prisoner because it went into their territorial waters. So,
Correct.
but
Correct.
then
But
that's the reason I'm very strict about the vulnerability and the threat, because even though they're related as a threat, they look similar. They have very different vulnerabilities they're attacking.
and that's correct. I think there's two credible attack vectors in play here, or maybe even more. The one is where you're presenting something that's positive, but it's actually negative. And the other one is you're presenting something negative that's actually positive. So you present to the ECDIS that they're off course when they're not, or that you're presenting that you're on course when you're not. So if you wanted to say, especially perhaps at night, if you wanted to steer the ship in a different direction at night, but give the crew, you'd have more time to direct it into the wrong direction if you let the crew believe that they're still on course, even though they're not.
All right. So given GPS signals can be jammed and faked, then the system will represent the location at a wrong point in space.
Yes.
And here we would need, I don't know, redundant satellite systems. So GNSS and GPS, redundant satellite. Oh God, I don't even know how to type anymore.
It's late in the day for us.
I know. Oh, come on. Won't you help me?
As far as countermeasures go, there's a couple different things. One of them is to ensure that you have a secure channel between the two. Ideally, if it's a closed network, that's a little bit easier. The other aspect would be some sort of cryptographic checksums to say, well, I have a way to essentially say, you mentioned unsigned, so perhaps it's cryptographically signed, and then I can validate the integrity of it. Could be computationally expensive if you're talking about a lot of data.
I mean, on the GPS side, being it basically radiation coming from outer space, there's not much you can do, right? You don't own it. You cannot do a lot of it. You can perhaps embed a plausibility based on the physics of the signal coming from space and not from a closer place, based on the strength of the signal direction or something else. I'm not exactly sure what could be done, but then having redundant satellite systems, redundant satellite systems, and detect contradictions. So if you have GNSS and GPS and they tell you different stories, you know,
Yeah.
you know one of
you
them
have
is
to
wrong.
look into it. Yeah, one of them's a liar. Yeah, that's certainly true. And I think the other thing is that you're also looking at input output, right? So if the input is still good, but the output has been tampered with versus tampering with the input, you know, there's clearly you have to get access to the OT system, and so that would be the the big factor that you'd have to analyze. How difficult is it to compromise that system? And then what would what's the best way to deal with it once you get there?
Yes. So let me see if we can get it to represent this based on the table you created. Let's see if we can get it. Create a diagram using graph-based.language of a modern vessel of, I mean, we can skip that. The nodes contain a title and brief description of their purpose. The edges describe in very few words the purpose. If interacting with different types of satellites for communications or GPS, depict each individually, or positioning. Apply the network separation recommended to clusters onboard onboard systems. Any port system should be. Let's see what it turns out, right? So it will think a little bit about it, but then it allows me to spend a lot less time. I have to type a bit, but it generates for me a diagram, which I can then start iterating upon and deciding whether it makes sense. So I know it doesn't look like a diagram yet, but it will look like one.
Right.
And it will allow me to better understand things. Now, one thing that I have realized is it doesn't necessarily understand how these different systems are hooked to each other. So let's see what it turns out. I'll copy it, put it in a container diagram. So let me create a.
It's amazing. I haven't seen you do this before.
I know. I loved it. I love doing it. It's one of the best things about this forum. It allows me to do experiments. Now, of course, I'm doing my experiments. Vessel, container, graph-based. So I have a graph-based diagram. Now it's there. So let's see what turns out. So it really does help, and it now I can. Okay, didn't like the diagram. Is something wrong with it? It's funny. All right. I would like to know why you're not creating the thing. All right. No, there it is. Okay, it's so huge. Which means I would probably need to start working a bit on making it easier to understand, right? So I would say I would probably cluster. So I have my IT systems here. I have my OT systems there.
Mm-hmm.
My management systems and the port systems, and they're outside. So I would probably cluster the ship. So this is one of the things I have in the scripts in the repo that I have shared with everyone. I have these snippets that you can just import into VS Code for helping you out. So the idea here is I create the cluster ship. I say this is a ship, and this is context of the ship. I will call it my onboard data center just for fun. And I will just basically take this one here, although it will break the diagram. I know. I'm sorry for breaking the diagram. I know. I'm sorry for breaking the diagram. I promise I'll be better. Now, so now we can see the relationship, even though it's hard to see, and I would definitely need to take it. So we need to understand what is talking to what. So Port Authority, customs, we have management systems, we have our guest networks. We have a lot of networks here, but we see that the networks are more like disconnected from everything. User network is fine for it to be disconnected. Guest network for our pilots and whoever, fine. Admin network, okay, I can live with that. But then I don't have a lot of systems here. Communication systems, passenger servicing, VSAT, production OT, development OT wouldn't have development OT.
I hope not.
I mean, you can see that it's kind of. I had created one just before this exercise, which actually didn't look that bad, but I wanted to create it live, just not to do the thing like in the cooking shows, in which they start typing things and then they come with a baked cake out of the oven.
Yeah.
So where are they? All right, open test. So I'm having some issues with my mouse. Come on, guys. There is some issue here. Test now. Here you can see. I played a little. All right. Did it stop or not?
It seems like it started again.
All right.
Show's recording.
All right. So I mean that means we're probably at the length of the show. So we need to cut the short. I will put this in GitHub. It will be available, all of it, the output, the images, everything. So this one was a bit shorter. It created a different. It's a bit more readable, but it was not classified per system, and it was not classified in clusters. So I was trying to get it to do it by at once. It didn't work that well. Let me see if this one is a bit better. I actually like this one a lot more because it contains the port authorities, it contains the shipping company, the cargo handling facilities, the equipment manufacturer, and the cybersecurity firms doing anything on top of it, right? Which is nice to have more of the onboard ship systems and everything outside of it, which should represent more or less what we showed in the beginning. So since we're at the limit of time, I will again put everything we created for this show, or for this recording, or for this session on GitHub. I will commit everything. I will share it in GitHub. Feel free to take a look at it. I also share the GPT link, so I'll put it on screen in case anyone is looking at the recording and would like to see it, if my mouse allows me to do it at some point in life. There it goes. So I'll just leave it there while we say goodbye, and feel free to pause the recording to take a look at the resources. So thank you very much for being here. I appreciate, Robert, that you took the time to play with me and thinking on how to do things with bad things to ships. And this is the Open Security Summit, and see you next time. I'll think something different for next time. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Luis.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
everybody.